Right now, on every ordinary telephone call being made anywhere on Earth, a note is missing, not a small one. The lowest note in the speaker's voice, the one we mean when we say what pitch a person talks at. It is not being transmitted. It has never been transmitted in 100 years of telephone calls, and you have never once noticed. In this unit, we examine two numbers that ought not to fit together. The first is the telephone band. The traditional telephone network carries a narrow strip of sound, running from about 300 cycles per second at the bottom to about 3,400 at the top. That range was settled in the 1920s, and the ordinary telephone call has kept it ever since. The second is your voice. The lowest note in an adult man's speaking voice sits at around 120 cycles per second. 120 is not inside 300 to 3,400. It is underneath it. The note is filtered out at one end, and it does not arrive at the other. And yet you hear it perfectly. On every call you have ever made, you have heard a note that was never in the wire. By the end of this unit, you will know where it comes from. Part 1. What a voice is made of. Here we are fortunate to have an excellent specimen. An adult man saying hello. Down in his throat are two folds of tissue, and air from the lungs sets them slapping together, opening and closing at some steady rate. If they do that 120 times a second, we say his fundamental is 120. That is his pitch in the ordinary sense of the word. Speed the folds up, and his voice goes up. But the fundamental is never alone. A thing vibrating like this does not make one clean tone. It makes a whole family of them stacked above the fundamental at whole number multiples of it. Twice the rate, 3 times, 4, 5, 6, and on upward, fainter and fainter for dozens of steps. Those are the harmonics, and here is the shape we care about. A ladder, evenly spaced, from the bottom of the voice to the top of it. For our man at 120, the rungs stand at 120, 240, 360, 480, and so on all the way up. Hold that ladder in mind. This whole unit is about what happens when you saw the bottom rung off it. Part 2. Why the band is so narrow. The telephone did not settle on 300 to 3,400 because it sounded nice. It settled on it because sounding nice was expensive. A long-distance line in the 1920s was an enormously costly thing. Copper strung over hundreds of miles of poles, every mile of it maintained, and its value was measured in how many conversations it could carry at once. You fit many conversations onto one wire by giving each of them its own narrow slot of the spectrum and then stacking the slots. So the question in front of the engineers was never, how good can a telephone call sound? It was this. How little of a human voice can we send and still have two people understand each other? The answer was that strip, about 3,100 cycles per second of actual speech dropped into a 4,000 cycle slot, with a little empty room on either side so that one conversation could not lean into the next. Everything above the strip is discarded. That is why a telephone voice has no sparkle, the hiss in the letter S, the tap of a letter T. Those sit higher up and they were not paid for, and everything below the strip is discarded too. Which for most adult men, and for a fair number of women, means the fundamental itself. The note we call the pitch, a scrupulous word here because you deserve exactness. Not every call today is like this. A modern wideband connection carries a wider range and does send the fundamental. What we are describing is the traditional telephone channel. 100 years of telephone calls, every landline ever installed, and the shape the entire world's network was built to. And on that channel, the most important note in a human voice was thrown away deliberately to save money on copper. This was not an oversight. It was a budget, which leaves the obvious question. If the note was never sent, why has nobody in 100 years complained that it was missing? Part 3. The laboratory. The engineers who drew that band were not reckless people. Before they discarded the bottom of the human voice, somebody went and checked what happened when you did. In March of 1924, in the journal Physical Review, a physicist named Fletcher published a paper called The Physical Criterion for Determining the Pitch of a Musical Tone. Fletcher worked in the research arm of Western Electric, which had been incorporated as the Bell Telephone Laboratories the month before his paper appeared. His apparatus was a high-quality telephone system fitted with electrical filters, fine enough to remove any band of frequencies he chose and leave everything else untouched. Into it he sent a baritone, singing a vowel. And then he began deleting. First the fundamental. Gone. The pitch did not change, so he kept going, the fundamental and the first overtone, then the first two. He did not stop until he had removed the fundamental and the first 7 overtones above it. The entire bottom of the sound. 8 rungs of the ladder. Everything you would think a note is actually made of. The pitch did not change. The tone sounded different, certainly. Thinner, a change of quality, which is precisely the word Fletcher used. But the note it was on, the note a listener would hum back at you if you asked, was the same note it had always been. The lowest sound anywhere in that room was now several hundred cycles above the pitch that everybody in the room agreed they were hearing. Part 4. The ladder still points. So we arrive at the mechanism, and it is not the one most of us would guess. We have been assuming something perfectly reasonable, and it is wrong, that your ear finds the pitch of a sound by locating the lowest tone in it. Hear the bottom note, and that is the note. That is not what happens. Your ear takes in the whole ladder at once, every rung that arrives, and what it works with is not the position of any single rung. It is the spacing between them. Go back to our man at 120. A telephone call delivers his harmonics to you at 360, 480, 600, 720, and on upward. His fundamental is not among them. It was thrown away before it left the room he was standing in. But look at the gaps. 360 to 480 is 120. 480 to 600 is 120. Every gap in that ladder is the same because every rung is a whole number multiple of the same note, and there is exactly one note in the world that this ladder could have been built on. The largest number that divides every rung. Your hearing finds it, in a fraction of a second, without your knowledge or your permission, and hands it to you as the pitch of the voice. Saw the bottom rung off, and the spacing does not change. The ladder goes on pointing unmistakably at a note that is no longer there. That is what acousticians call the missing fundamental, and it means the deepest note in a telephone call is not received at all. It is reconstructed, at your end, by you. Part 5. Where else it is spent. Once you know the ear will do that for nothing, you can spend it everywhere, and we have. The speaker in your telephone is perhaps a couple of centimeters across. There is no physical way for something that small to move enough air to make a genuinely low note. So it doesn't. It plays the harmonics instead, cleanly, and lets your ear supply the foundation. And you hear a full, deep sound coming out of a device that cannot make one. And the trick was being spent long before there were telephones. To sound a note 1 octave below the lowest rank of pipes in a cathedral, you need a pipe some 32 feet tall. Which is a great deal of church to give over to one note, so organ builders learned to sound 2 smaller pipes together instead, and let the congregation's ears assemble the note that neither pipe was making. It has a name in the trade. They call it a resultant. Your earbuds do it. Your laptop does it. A cathedral did it in the 1600s. The review card. And so we have learned that the deepest note in a telephone call does not exist. It is not sent, it is not received, and it is nowhere in the wire at any point along the way. It is assembled at the very last moment, inside the head of the person listening, out of the spacing between the notes that did arrive. Which leaves us with what this unit was really about. The largest machine humanity has ever built was designed around a property not of sound, but of the listener. The engineers could afford to discard the most fundamental part of a human voice on every call, forever, because they knew the person at the other end would quietly put it back, and would never once be told that they had done the network a favor. Class dismissed. If you would like another lesson in something your senses assemble rather than receive, our unit on why nature has almost no blue in it, and where that color is really coming from, is waiting on the shelf.